traveled down a lonely road, and no one seemed to care. The burden on my weary back had bound me to despair. I oft complained to Jesus.
Gideon is a judge. Is that true? What is a judge? Okay, he's a leader. That judge, that word, there's another word that's a better word, really, than judge. Okay, yeah, he would be involved in some of that, but that's not his predominant role as a judge. His main responsibility was to deliver. Okay? That was his main responsibility. Remember, the children of Israel had sinned. Because of that sin, they were brought into captivity. And then it was the judge's responsibility to deliver them out of captivity. So that little word, deliverer, is really a little bit better word than the other. When Gideon was called, Gideon was a little bit skeptical maybe to take this position. Is that true? Did he want some confirmation about what he was supposed to do? Yes. So God gives him how many signs? Be careful. 3 signs. Yes, God had given him 3 signs. And we talked about the last 2 in our last lesson. And it involved a piece of fleece. Okay, a piece of fleece. And the first time that he tested God, what did he want the fleece? What did he want to happen to the fleece when the dew fell? Okay, yes, he wanted the fleece to be wet, and he wanted the ground to be dry. Did that happen? Yes. And he, wrings out the water, whole bowl full, right? But that wasn't quite enough, was it? Okay. Be merciful unto me, O God. Remember that? And he asked for a second sign. What was the second sign? Okay, just the opposite, right? I want the fleece to be dry, and all around it, I want it to be wet. Did it happen? Yes. So God did exactly what Gideon desired to do. Now, we left that lesson with a question, didn't we? And the question was this. Now the ball is in Gideon's court. Will he obey? Okay. Folks, even though we have all the evidence that we possibly need, right? Even though we have all the promises of God standing behind us, guess what we still can do? Choose not to, can't we? Okay? So we enter into this next chapter with that thought in mind. Is Gideon going to do what God really wants him to do? Okay? Here's what's interesting. Little did Gideon know that God had a test for him. Gideon had been asking for all these tests from God, right? Over and over. God, give me a sign. God, do this. God, do that. Well, guess what? God's got a good one up his sleeve for Gideon. Let's talk about the region of troop location. Judges 7 verse 1. Then Jerubbaal. Who in the world is that? I thought we were studying who? Gideon. And yet chapter 7 verse 1 says, then Jerubbaal. Who is that? Gideon. That's the other name of Gideon, is it not? Does anybody remember when he got it? Yes, after he tore down Baal's altar and erected the altar of God, remember? And does anybody remember what it means, what it stands for? It's got whose name in it? Baal. Is that a good thing? Baal is an evil God, is it not? It's a false God. It was the God that Israel was worshiping instead of Jehovah God. So why in the world would he wear this name Jerubbaal? Does anybody remember what it means? let Baal contend. Okay? Remember, he tore down the altar and he erected an altar for God, and the people and those of his house came out and they were arguing with him. Well, where is he that tore down the altar of Baal? And his father comes out and he says, will you contend for Baal? Let Baal do what? Let Baal, if he's really a god, let Baal contend for himself. If he's so almighty and if he's so powerful, why does he need you little rinky-dink humans fighting on his behalf? Let Baal contend for himself. And so here Jerubbaal is wearing the name, let Baal contend. Okay? Baal's got to fight. Let him do it himself, right? Don't send your wife out to fight your fight, fellas. Okay? Somebody says she could do it. And I think that was a woman's voice. Mercy. And Jerubbaal, who is Gideon, and all the people that were with him rose up early and pitched beside the well of Harod, so that the host of the Midianites were on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. And all the people that were with Gideon. Does anybody remember who all these people are? Okay, his family, the Abiezrites, right? And what tribe was Gideon from? Manasseh. So the tribe of Manasseh came. Who else? Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, right? Yep, if you read my notes, you got it, right? It's in there, okay? But these are the ones who had gathered. They were located in what part of Israel? Does everybody remember? The northern part of Israel, okay? Because most likely the enemy would approach from where? Would come from the north, okay? So all the people were there, folks. Guess what? The battle is about to what? The battle's about to begin, absolutely. The text says they pitched by the well of Harod, H-A-R-O-D. This is the only time this place is mentioned in all of the Bible, okay, as far as the well of Harod. 2 Samuel 23:25 tells us that two of David's mighty men were from the town of Harod, okay, the town of Harod. It was somewhere just off what we refer to as the Jezreel Valley, where this battle is going to take place. We've never found it archaeologically at all. Okay, so we're not exactly certain of the exact location of either one of these places. For that matter, the hill of Moreh, we're not exactly certain where there is. But they had encamped by a what? By a well. Why? Oh yes, folks, if you're going to do battle with somebody and you're going to be there for quite some time, there's one thing that you must have, mustn't you? You can go a few days, maybe a week, 10 days without food, but you get out there fighting and you've got to have a good supply of water, don't you? So they encamp by this well. Notice point E there. At this moment, the emotions are running high, aren't they? Can you imagine? Folks, this valley is not just, hundreds of miles from one another. If you're on one side of the valley and the enemy's on the other side of the valley, guess what you can do? You can see them. Okay? You can see the enemy camped on the other side. Okay? Folks, can you imagine the anticipation? Let me ask you this. When men go to battle, is there any fear in their hearts whatsoever? If you don't believe it, go back and look at some of these movies that have been done about battles and stuff. Guys are throwing their guts up. They're shaking like crazy right before the moment of battle, right? Because you know what can happen. Death. And then there's some individuals that are what? They're just itching for battle, right? Let me at them. We laugh about that, but there was a man in Scripture who was that way. I think his name was David. Wasn't he kind of that way? Let me get at that big old joker. I'll drop him. Okay? Folks, both sides can hear the sounds of the opposing army. as they get ready for battle. Guess what? Gideon is what? He's obedient, isn't he? He's obedient. He's tested God, he's asked for the signs, and now guess what? He's put his full trust and faith in God. He's come to the very edge of the battlefield himself. He's on one side, the enemy's on the other. All they have to do now is what? Fight. That's all they've got to do is fight. And God has promised the victory, has He not? But not quite. Because point number 2 is this: the removal of some of Gideon's troops. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Guys, if I'm going up against a bully, I want as many on my side as I can get. Don't you? We're not certain at this point in our reading exactly how many people have gathered with him, but we're going to find out, aren't we? Notice the stipulation by God. It begins with a complication. Are you ready for this? And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people that are with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands. Are you kidding? Folks, an army is to fight what? An army, right? And you amass as many people as you can possibly amass in order to win the victory. And God looks down and He says, sorry, Gideon, you just got too many people here. But now notice the reasoning, the concern of God. Lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, mine own hand hath saved me. Folks, God did not want Israel to take the what? The credit. Okay, you got too many. If you win with this army, guess what? You're going to think you did it. And you're going to vaunt yourself. That little word vaunt there means this: to gleam, to boast. Brown Driver and Briggs says this: to glorify oneself, to get to oneself the glory. Look at what we've done as Israel. God didn't want that, folks. For some reason, man longs to take the credit for his victories. Man will not take the credit for his losses and his failures. You hear it all the time on TV, don't you? Don't matter what administration it is. If they're failing, it's always somebody else's fault. But if they did great, guess what? Look what we've done. It's unbelievable, isn't it? When you turn into the Humanist Manifesto 2, there's a saying that's in that manifesto, and I've got it quoted there. No deity will save us. We must save ourselves. Isn't that a boast by man? It's unbelievable, folks. You see, man has this desire to what? To take credit, to be self-sufficient, to be independent, to say he did it, to not want anybody else to get the credit, especially who? Especially God. Okay? And God knew the tendency of man. God understood the way man sometimes can be. And therefore He looks at Gideon and He says, Gideon, you just got too many folks here. The solution given by God. Now therefore go to. Proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. Let me ask you something. Why are you in an army? What's the purpose of being in an army? Really? That's the purpose for being in an army? Wow. If I get in an army, I know that I'm going to what? Fight the enemy. Right? I'm going to fight that's the purpose of an army. Well, sort of, kind of. Our army doesn't really serve that purpose anymore. Okay? Our army serves the purpose to do what today? Provide school and jobs for people. Okay? Really and truly. Okay? Because then when the army's called up to fight, guess what happens? What do you mean fight? I didn't join the army to fight. I joined the army to get an education. Okay? And we think that's a crazy thought, don't we? You would think that, okay, if you've enlisted in the army, if you've come to the aid of the army, then guess what? You know you're going to fight. Well, folks, in order to fight, you've got to have a little bit of what? Courage, don't you? Well, God knows that there's a bunch of folks when it comes to being in an army whose hearts are filled with what? Fear. Now therefore go to, proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. Folks, warfare is a horrifying experience, isn't it? You see, back then, you didn't have fighter jets doing most of the fighting. Okay? You didn't fight with technology. Most of the fighting was done how? Hand-to-hand combat, wasn't it? Can you imagine? Notice the wounds, the blood, the tears, the cries of anguish, pain, and death all around a soldier while he's in battle. Folks, that would fill anybody's heart with what? With fear. And if individuals were given the option to fight or not to fight, what do you think they'll do? They'll choose not to fight. I was given the option when I grew up. You can enlist or you don't got to. And guess what Big Vic didn't do? I don't got to. Okay? I never enlisted in the service. Never served a day in the service. Okay? Now, a lot of individuals before me did, but it wasn't because they wanted to. It was because they what? Got drafted into it. The draft was lifted, so I didn't have to. And I didn't. Because most people don't want to what? Folks, they don't want to go into a battle. You don't want to have to face death. You don't want to have to do some of the things that armies are called upon to do. It's not fun, is it? And there is fear that's there. Thus God gave soldiers the option of returning to their homes who were fearful and afraid. Right? Now think about it. Let's say you've got 100,000 people, right, gathered for battle. Right? And so you go out there and you say, okay guys, anybody who is fearful, anybody who is scared, you can go home. How many of that 100,000 do you expect to go home? 80,000? Now see, that's a woman talking. Because when you talk to a man, you wouldn't think that, would you? You know? 80,000? I mean, I thought y'all were men. I thought you had some guts. I thought you had a little bit of courage about you. You know, 10,000, 15,000, you know, surely. You know, isn't it kind of embarrassing to walk away and say, why are you leaving? I'm scared to death. Boy, that's a man. You know, you show up at your home the next day, you watch, I thought you was at the battle. I was, but I'm scared. And God said, don't go if you're scared. You know, I'm sure your wife is so proud of you, you know. Your children come home from school. Dad, what you doing home? I'm scared to death. I ain't going out on that battlefield. Boy, you know, that's something your kids can go to school tomorrow and brag about. Daddy came home yesterday because he's scared. Mine did too. Folks, you know, you'd just think that people would have the guts and the courage to fight, wouldn't you? But the reality is it's just the opposite, isn't it? Remember David, when he came to the field of battle there with Goliath, how many would go fight Goliath? 0. And all they needed was what? 1. Who should have been on the field? King Saul should have been on that battlefield fighting for his people. You know what? 1 against 1. I'm the king. The buck stops here. I fight. But not a 1. went on that battlefield. It just seems like when fear takes over us, that it's so destructive, isn't it? The some who departed. And the return of the people, 20 and 2,000, and there remain 10,000. Two-thirds. Folks, let me buy you a cake and say, here you go, but I want 2/3 of it. You're going to be a little bit upset at Vic because you're going to get about one big piece. And Vic's going to get the rest. Here he is. He has done everything he can do to amass the troops, has he not? 32,000 people, folks. One individual said that it is estimated Midian could have had as many as 100,000 troops brought to this battle. At 32,000, you're still way undernumbered, aren't you? And so God comes along and He says, look here, you got way too many people, Gideon. Get rid of them. Tell everybody that's afraid to go home. And 22,000 people. Folks, that's a stadium full. They go home. Unbelievable. Clark makes an observation. I don't know how true this is, but I want you to listen to it. A state of slavery, is that what the children of Israel had been in for the last 7 years? To whom? To the Midianites. Okay? A state of slavery debases the mind of man and renders it incapable of being influenced by the pure principles of patriotism and religion. In other words, if you stifle a human being long enough through the evils of captivity and slavery, you wound the heart of the person, don't you? And that may have been part of what was going on here. Folks, that's quite a reduction of fighting men, wasn't it? I'm not nearly as concerned about the men who went home as I am of who now? Gideon. Right? Just think of all he's been through to get enough courage, to get enough zeal, to get enough gumption, to get enough enthusiasm to go. And he gathers all these people together and he's right there on the field of battle. And now God sends 2/3 of them home. Folks, you see what I said a while ago? Gideon's now getting tested by whom? By God, isn't he? Unbelievable. Oh, this is an easy one. This is an easy one. Okay? Yeah. Look at them. They're already running. Okay? I want you to look at point B under the note there. This was not something that would be logical to a commander of an army. Leaders know that to win battles, manpower is what? Essential. We'll come back to that thought in just a little bit. Okay? How many have gone home? 22,000. How many are there? 10,000. Now some of you have said, well, that's still a good number. It ain't low enough for God. The release of more of Gideon's troops. The supposition by God. And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people are yet too many. Oh, God, what are you doing? Too many? I just lost 2/3. We just lost 22,000. Yeah, but it's still, you got too many. Unbelievable. I wrote down there, too many. I thought God had promised Gideon that He would assist him in winning the war. Doesn't seem like He's assisting, does it? Not much. The sight of the test. Bring them down under the water, and I will try them for thee there. And it shall be that of whom I say unto thee, this shall go with thee, the same shall go with thee. And of whomsoever I say unto thee, this shall not go with thee, the same shall what? Not go up. Because God's got a test in mind. Okay? Wells of water. Anybody seen a spring coming forth from the ground? Some of them can be small, right? And you have to kind of really work to harness the water. And then there are some springs that are quite large, aren't they? And the spring not only comes out of the water, but it also forms a what? Yeah, it can form a small body of water, a pond, a small lake. Okay, we've got some places that we can go to right here in Florida that are springs, and you go to them, and guess what you can do? You can get several hundred people in there swimming and stuff, can't you? So I'd love to have seen this fountain, this well of Herod, wouldn't you? And what it looked like. It was enough that God says, I need you to bring these 10,000 people to the water, because I've got a test for them. Isn't that what He said? And I will what? Try them for thee there. That little word try means to fuse metal. That is to refine, to smelt, to test. Man. Why the need for a test? Why the need for a test? Wrote down some points. Folks, Israel had been in bondage to Midian for how long? 7 years. Just because you amass a great number of people, does that mean all of them are good fighting men? Not necessarily. A test. This was not a professionally trained army, was it? Folks, it's not like they had been, gone to camp and been training for the last 6, 8, 10 months. Gideon gets a call from God, he issues a call to the people, and they assemble themselves, don't they? They've not been highly trained as an army. These were all of the men who were 20 years old and up. Somewhere between the ages of 20 and 60. Okay, would be the fighting force on this particular occasion. Folks, you've just got a group of men from where? From Israel. Do you think some of them may have been trained fighters? Maybe. Not many. You think Midian would have allowed Israel to train an army while they were in captivity? Are you kidding? You're my what? You're my servants. You're my slaves. You're not training an army. You start training an army, you might do what against me? You might rise up in rebellion against me. So it's not just this highly trained, skillful army. But notice the stipulations of the test. So He brought them down, the people under the water, and the Lord said unto Gideon, everyone that lappeth of the water with his tongue, as a dog lappeth, him shalt thou set by himself. Likewise, everyone that boweth down upon his knees to drink. So we got two ways of drinking water, right? One way, you do what? Put your hand down in the water, lap it like a dog, right? And the other way, you just what? You just bend down into the water, put your head in the water, and just suck a good suck of water out, right? Which one you going to get more water? Put your head in it, right? Okay? Now, when you're teaching your kids and grandkids to brush their teeth, don't fill the sink up and just dunk their head in it. Okay? Teach them to lap like a dog. You want them to be on God's side, don't you? Okay? But notice the sums reported. And the number of them that lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300 men. But all the rest of the people bowed down upon their knees to drink water. 9,700 sucked the water with their faces down in it. Only 3 lapped like a dog. 300. Man, now what's God going to do? The selection by God, verse 4, the retention of how many? 300. And the Lord said unto Gideon, by 300 men that lapped will I save you. Man. And deliver the Midianites into thine hand, and let all the other people go, every man to what? to his place. I don't know about you folks. If I'm Gideon, I'm worried. A little bit, right? I had 32,000 people here. And you've reduced them down to 1%. That's what 300 is of 32,000. 1%. 99% went home. In fact, a little bit more than that. Okay? 320 would have been what? 10 would have been 1%. Dropped them below 1% of the people. Now here's what's interesting, and I don't know that this is the case or not because the Bible doesn't say it. Okay? Most commentators say that God chose this group because they were the better military men. Okay? Now they base that on what? What do you think they base this? God doesn't say that in the text, so what do they base that on? They base it on something in the text. What did God say He was going to do? I'm going to try these people. What's that little word try mean? To test. Okay? So, in other words, when they came and they drank the water, that was God's way of what? Testing them. But God doesn't say what He's really searching for. Okay? Some say they did not dispose, or these 300 did not dispose of safety in order to take care of their personal needs. Okay, they were still, they were cognizant that there was danger around. Okay, so if I'm going to drink with caution, aren't I? And I'm going to keep my eyes out so that I can continue to see. Would that be a quality of a good soldier? Sure, it'd be a quality of a good soldier. These were the ones who were alert, cognizant of the need to be constantly watching the enemy. I want you to listen to this, though. Was this really a test of bravery or military prowess? Had this test ever been used by military commanders in the past? Weren't numbers more important to leaders than the way their men drank water from a pool? Who would X off 9,700 men because of the manner in which they drank water? Could you see Patton making this a test of his men? Hey guys, come here. See that pond over there? Go drink. Another guy. Oh, I take you, you go home. Folks, there's never been a test like this ever issued. You know what I think? I think it had to do with nothing except what God wanted. That's my opinion. I'm going to test them, yep. And guess what? The group that drinks the least, that's the number I'm taking. Okay? Turn your Bibles. 1 Corinthians. Chapter 1. Beautiful chapter. 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Verse 25. Who's got that verse? Man. Do we have evidence here of both things? Is God manifesting what man would say is foolishness? You're going to war. You're going to battle with an enemy who's kept you in captivity for 7 years. If you think they're going to easily let you go, you're nuts. And so I think what I'll do is I'll reduce your army by 99% and just send them home. Folks, that's sheer foolishness in the mind of who? Man. Because the foolishness of God is what? Wiser than man. Got to be baptized in that old water. I don't know why you got to be baptized in that water. That baptism that don't save you. Ain't no power in that water. You see, man's always doing what? Trying to out-reason God. And folks, sometimes God chooses foolish things to do what? To confound the wise man. You see? Because the foolishness of God is what? Wiser than man. Notice that next statement. And the weakness of God is what? Stronger than man. On that occasion, if you were to have seen the armies of the Midianites on one side and the 300 men of Gideon on the other side, who were still not well-trained army men, they've been in captivity for 7 years. Which group would you say are the strongest? The Midianites. There's no way Israel's going to win this battle. There is no way that there's going to be victory by Gideon today. But guys, we forget what? The weakness of God. And that's what Midian was that's what Israel was that day. They were weak. The weakness of God is stronger than who? Than man. Jump down to verse 27 through 29. But God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things that are mighty. And the base things of the world, and the things which are despised hath God chosen. Yea, and the things which are not, to bring to naught the things that are, that no flesh should glory where? In His presence. Look at verse 31, the last part of that verse. That according as it is written, he that glorieth, let him glory where? In the Lord. Man. What a beautiful text, isn't it? Folks, God doesn't operate the way we do. Okay? And the very moment that you and I try to put God in our little box and say, this is the way God's supposed to act, this is the way God's supposed to behave, this is the way God does, and it's the way you do everything, you got a problem. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Isaiah 55 verses 8 and 9. Folks, you and I can't hardly think like God thinks. Can we? What I find interesting is in the context of all this discussion right here in 1 Corinthians 1, you want to know what he's talking about? What he's really talking about? The foolishness of preaching. Who would have thought that God would have chose the foolishness of preaching to save the lost? Don't we sometimes think it's kind of foolish? Sometimes we get our doubts about it, right? Yeah, we're not growing, so we quit preaching and we bring in programs to grow the church. We quit growing, we quit preaching, so we bring in an instrument and music and all this junk, right? Folks, we got to keep trusting who? Got to keep trusting the power of God, don't we? See, what seems foolish to us is wise to God. And what we think is weak is powerful when it's used in the hand of God. And that's the lesson that Gideon is about to learn, isn't he? Unbelievable. The securing of the 300, Judges 7 verse 8. So the people took their, what's that word? That's the way everybody says it. Victuals. V-I-C-T-U-A-L-S. Victuals. That's not victuals. Now, we Southern folks, we had to manipulate that word so that we could really pronounce it correctly. You know what it is? Victuals. You wouldn't believe that, would you? See, God's a Southern boy. He called the wise men from where? Afar. Okay? Right here we got some what? We're about to eat some victuals. Okay? So the people took victuals in their hand and their trumpets. And he sent all the rest of Israel, every man into his tent, and retained those 300. And the host of Midian was beneath him in the valley. Notice what the text says. He did what to the 300 men? He took them he retained the 300 men. That little word retain means this: to fasten upon, to seize, to bind. Folks, these were the ones secured for what? For battle. Now I am asking the question about who. Not just Gideon, but about the who. The 300, right? Can you imagine being a part of that 300? You know, it's one, you step up to the plate and you got 32,000 against 100,000. That's one picture. Then you're down to 10,000 against 100,000, right? That's another picture. Now we're down to 300 against 100,000, and that's a whole different ball game, right? And folks, Midian is just on the other side of the valley, and it's ready to do warfare. You know it? And so you take your supplies, you take your trumpets, and you go off in your little group over there. And everybody else does what? Goes home. Unbelievable. Man. Notice point 4. Gideon was poised to do battle with only 300 men at his disposal. Folks, God had reduced the number of troops enough to let Israel know that if you win, what? You didn't do it. I did it. Man. This was a serious conflict. And the host of Midian was what? Was beneath them in the valley. Folks, they could just look over there and see them. It's ready to start. This is serious business. Man. Look at the conclusion there. Gideon didn't have one say in this selection process. Ain't that something? Not one say. You don't hear Gideon, you don't hear God asking Gideon, what do you think about that? He had nothing to say in this, right? How did Gideon feel knowing that he would do battle against the Midianites with only 300 men? Well, notice how I put that. 300 men and God. Folks, what is Gideon about to manifest? Turn over to Hebrews, the 11th chapter. What is Hebrews 11? Hall of Fame of the faithful is what we say, don't we? Look at verse 32. And what shall I say more? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon. Guess what he just did? He just threw Gideon into the Hall of Fame of what? Of the faithful. Folks, Gideon's faith is being tested, something fierce by God. You know it? You know, we don't like our faith to be tested, do we? We don't like our faith to be tried. That's not fair. That's not right. Can't believe God would do that. I wonder if anybody went in their tents that night talking like that. You know? Can you believe God? He sent home almost every one of our troops. There's only 300 of us left. And thank God one had faith. Who was that? Gideon. And God didn't fail to put him in Hebrews the 11th chapter. Didn't tell his story. Wouldn't you love to heard what he said? By faith Gideon destroyed the army of the Midianites with only what? 300 men. Man. And God. Guys, the fighting is about to get serious. So come next week and we'll see what happens, how much bloodshed transpires.